From who I am, I'm an associate professor in the Department of Latin American and Latina Studies at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, City University of New York. And I am a JD PhD, and I have published and researched extensively in the area of human rights, including violence against women and girls, and domestic violence in the Caribbean and Latin America. My countries of focus, just because contextually I'll be moderating today, are Cuba, Brazil, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic. I want to start with a summary of the side event goals. And so the object of this side event, of today's side event, is to inform the member states, UN entities, and civil society on the work of the two rapporteurs more broadly, and specifically on their findings regarding the extent to which states are fulfilling their responsibility to act with due diligence to eliminate violence against women, drawing on some national practices and jurisprudence from the regional human rights mechanism. And secondly, to encourage a dialogue among member states, UN entities, and civil society on achievements, developments, opportunities, challenges, and concerns regarding the state's responsibility to eliminate violence against women. I'm going to briefly provide an overview on the background of our panelists today. Mr. Ivan Simonovic, who will provide opening remarks and an opening perspective for us today, assumed his functions as Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights on the 17th of July 2010, heading the IACHR's New York office. Before joining the United Nations from 2008, he held the position of Minister of Justice of Croatia. Previously, he was Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Permanent Representative to the United Nations in New York, where he served as Senior Vice President and President of the Economic and Social Council from 2001 to 2003. He has experience and has published extensively in the fields of international relations, law, human rights, and development of national institutions. To my right is Ms. Manjoo. She's the current Human Rights Council Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. This year she submitted a report to the Human Rights Council on the issue of state responsibility for eliminating violence against women and the due diligence standard as a tool for asserting a state's obligation and analyzing its actions and omissions. She's the former parliamentary commissioner of the Commission on Gender Equality in South Africa, a constitutional body mandated to oversee the promotion and protection of gender equality. She has written extensively on this topic and has held numerous visiting professorships, too many to include in this bio. And she was also the Eleanor Roosevelt Fellow with the Human Rights Program at Harvard Law School and a clinical instructor in the program. She holds a part-time post as a professor in the Department of Public Law at the University of Cape Town. And to my far right, we have Ms. Robinson. She's the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights Rapporteur on the Rights of Women. She brings to the discussion the valuable contribution of the Inter-American Commission on the issue of violence against women, including providing redress for victims. She teaches gender in the law, constitutional law, and Commonwealth Caribbean human rights, among other law subjects at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica. She has been a consultant for international agencies and has advised Caribbean governments on topics related to legislation on gender and children's rights, among others. She has written and published reports on a range of topics, including gender, the rights of the LGBTI persons, sexual harassment, sexual rights, sex work, and the law, and the rights of children. And today we were supposed to have Ms. Whitney Brown, the Senior Director of International Law and Policy, leading on development of human rights policy and analysis for Amnesty International, but she's not well, so we wish her a speedy recovery. So I'd like to, at this point, pass it over, the microphone over. The opening remarks will be delivered by Mr. Ivan Simonovic, Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights and head of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Dear Special Rapporteurs, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to participate in this event aimed to assess the achievements, opportunities, and challenges of the international community in eliminating violence against women, and specifically state responsibility in this regard. I'm particularly pleased that we are doing this jointly with Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, given the lead role that the Inter-American system has played in developing legal standards and jurisprudence on violence against women in Americas. I'm also pleased to have a voice of academia here with us at the table. Ladies and gentlemen, violence against women is one of the most pervasive human rights violations today. It is deeply rooted in discrimination and systematic disregard for the equal enjoyment of human rights by women and girls. Human Rights Office work on violence against women and girls focuses precisely on addressing the continuum of discrimination against women and girls that occurs throughout the course of their lives and in some cases can ultimately lead to death. This link between discrimination and violence against women and girls has been clearly established in a number of international human rights conventions, including the CEDAW Convention, the Council of Europe's Istanbul Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women, and the Inter-American Convention on the Prevention, Punishment and Eradication of Violence Against Women. Human rights mechanisms, notably the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and the CEDAW Committee, have recognized the need to address the continuum of discrimination and violence that affect women and girls. State responsibility requires addressing this continuum by putting in place adequate laws and policies to ensure non-discrimination. This obligation also requires that states act with due diligence to eliminate all forms of violence against women by preventing, investigating, prosecuting and punishing these acts. This principle of due diligence notes that states are not only responsible for acts or omission by their own agents, they also incur responsibility when they fail to prevent and respond to acts and omissions by non-state actors or private individuals. This principle is enshrined in the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and the CEDAW General Recommendation number 19. Human Rights Office is monitoring states' fulfillment of their obligation to prevent, protect, prosecute and punish acts of violence against women and girls, to ensure compliance with international human rights standards. Let me just give a couple of examples of the work that we are doing in this area. Human Rights Office is monitoring and promoting appropriate responses by states for so-called honor killings and dowry deaths in the Middle East and North Africa. With a number of high-profile cases on rape, murder and intimate partners violence in Latin America and the Caribbean, our office in that region are working to assist the development of special laws on femicide. IACHR field presences in political and peacekeeping missions throughout the world through Human Rights Women Protection Advisors also monitor, investigate and report on conflict-related sexual violence. On my recent visit to Central African Republic, I was struck by high rates of sexual violence and met with numerous victims. In my meetings with highest national authorities, as well as with the Security Council here in New York, I stressed that re-establishment of the rule of law and transitional justice process are critical to ensuring accountability and delivering justice, truth and reparations for violence suffered by women. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude. In all interventions on violence against women, we will continue to work towards combating impunity, promoting accountability, and strengthening investigations and judicial responses, while also raising awareness about the fact that discrimination of women is the root cause of violence. Just as states are obliged to prevent violence against women by providing for restraining orders, safe houses, and efficient criminal proceedings, they are also responsible for eradicating discrimination against women and to promote gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. In a sense, it set the context really well to my report. Since we have 2 rows of young people with us, which is very nice, I'm going to explain a little bit what my mandate is so that before I go into the subject matter. So my mandate is on violence against women, its causes and consequences, which means that I have to look at systemic, structural root causes of violence. So it isn't about just the act of violence itself, whether it's rape, whether it's domestic violence, or other forms of sexual harassment in the workplace. It's a broad range of acts, manifestations of violence, but also causes and consequences. I was appointed by the Human Rights Council in 2009, and I'm serving my 2nd term. And there are 4 activities that I undertake in carrying out this mandate. One is producing thematic reports, like the one that I will be talking a little bit about in a minute. This year I spoke about the issue of state responsibility. I have also produced a report on Wednesday to the General Assembly here in New York, looking at the issue of violence against women and custodial settings. So looking at women who are incarcerated, whether in detention centers, whether in prisons, immigration centers, psychiatric hospitals, and what are the pathways that lead to women being incarcerated. And it is quite shocking how the statistics have been going up. The number of women being imprisoned, the numbers are going up for a range of offenses depending on the country. Drug-related offenses seem to be playing a huge role in terms of the incarceration of women. But so I look at what are the pathways, and then I look at what are the conditions under which women are kept in prisons, and what are the consequences for women, their children, their families, their communities of incarceration. Something that needed to be pointed out to many member states, and this is something that is known globally, that the majority of women that are detained, whether in police custody or in prison or in immigration detention, are not a threat to society. The majority of women are not a threat to society, and this is what my report argues, that states need to be creative about alternatives to incarceration, because the price that women pay, from the pathways to the conditions under which they kept to the consequences, are huge, and we as a global community pay a huge price with what's going on with the incarceration of women. The second thing that I do is undertake country visits. I cannot visit a country unless I am invited by the government. I normally send a request to the government asking for an invitation, and many, many countries are very positive about inviting us to carry out an investigation. We don't work for the United Nations. I don't work for the United Nations. I'm not a staff member. I don't work for any government or NGO. I'm what's called an independent expert appointed by the Commission. So our reports are seen as objective because we don't have an agenda. Our only agenda is to enter into a dialogue with the country, to try and assist in terms of its thinking and bringing our expertise to the table. The third activity that I undertake is receiving individual